Grand Amplitude Thoreau Season 2, Episode 1. A McKnight in Tearful Armor. The legend of Gideon Rivers did not happen all at once. It was built quietly, methodically, and with brutal precision. Throughout his first season, Coach Gable McIntyre did not treat Gideon like a standard heavyweight. He deployed him like a tactical weapon. Gable knew Gideon lacked the decade of somatic heuristics that the seasoned wrestlers possessed, so he used the giant selectively, keeping him out of the grueling early tournaments to focus entirely on building his technical foundation. Behind the closed doors of the wrestling room, Gable and Zu Maku relentlessly molded the farm kid. They taught him how to translate his undeniable torque into defensive leverage. By the time the season hit its final stretch, Gideon had become nearly invincible on his feet. Opponents would shoot for his legs, only to find themselves sprawled out, crushed beneath an immovable, calculating force. Gideon finished his abbreviated first season with a perfect 9-0 record, and the campus noticed. By the final home dual meet, the gymnasium bleachers were packed to the rafters. 3,000 people, an unheard-of crowd for the small college, crammed into the stifling heat just to watch the philosopher king step onto the mat. But the roar of the crowd was fleeting, and the absolute highs of the season were about to collide with a devastating low. The sudden, shocking passing of Professor Elia's Thorne hit the campus like a chilling frost. The intellectual giant, the man who had guided hundreds of souls through the dark woods of their own minds, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Following the sprawling, tear-filled afternoon funeral service, the crowds dispersed. But Gideon could not stomach the suffocating silence of his dorm room or the empty amphitheater. He needed the earth. He needed the back 40. He ventured back to the sprawling Rivers farm and was packing his rucksack on the farmhouse porch when his mother stepped out. Katie Rivers didn't offer empty platitudes. She recognized the profound, hollow grief in her son's eyes, the agonizing ache of losing his mentor, his intellectual anchor, and his respected elder. She walked over and gently placed a heavy, leather-bound book onto the canvas of his rucksack. "This is the McKnight family album," Katie said softly, her hand resting warmly over his. "My side of the family. You are a Rivers, Gideon, but you need to know your cultural heritage. You need to know what the Irish endured. Starvation, crossing the ocean in the dark, rebuilding from the dirt. That resilience is in your blood. When you feel like the world is too heavy to carry, remember that your ancestors are standing right there underneath you, holding it up." Gideon looked at the worn leather, nodded slowly, and shouldered his pack. Gideon made his way deep into the unpruned towering pines of the back 40, to a hidden, perfectly round pond that mirrored the twilight sky. He pitched his small canvas tent and built a roaring campfire. The loyal farm dogs, Sammy from Miami and Cappuccino, curled up by his boots, while a pair of barn cats prowled the perimeter of the firelight. Sitting on a log, Gideon opened the McKnight album. On the very first parchment page, he saw the ancient family crest. Beneath it, written in elegant, fatting script, was the family motto, Vincet Quipati. Beneath the Latin, someone had written the translation in a steady, determined hand. "He conquers who endures." Gideon stopped breathing. The words hit him with a stunning physical force. He conquers who endures. It wasn't about striking the hardest blow. It wasn't about being unfeeling or untouched by the tragedy of the world. It was about surviving the fire. It perfectly encapsulated the exact philosophical truths about radical grace that Elia's Thorne had spent the entire year trying to teach him, and it validated the brutal, grinding reality of his undefeated season on the mat. Katie Rivers, possessing a profound and quiet mother's wisdom, had known exactly what he would find, and exactly what it would do to his fractured spirit. 2 hours later, the crackle of the fire was interrupted by the snapping of twigs. Coach Gable McIntyre and Zu Maku emerged from the tree line. The death of Elia's Thorne hadn't just saddened the aging coach, it had triggered a staggering existential shock. Thorne was Gable's oldest friend and intellectual equal. Without him, the leader of the wrestling room suddenly felt untethered, a ship cast back into a violent storm. Gable needed the grounding dirt and absolute comfort of the Rivers farm just as desperately as Gideon did. They didn't announce themselves. They simply brought an extra thermos of coffee, took their places on a nearby log, and stared into the flames. But they wouldn't be the last. It started as a murmur in the distance, and then it grew like rolling thunder. Dozens of students from the college, kids who had sat in Thorne's amphitheater, kids who were feeling entirely lost without their compass, had somehow followed the rumor of Gideon's retreat. They began emerging through the pines, a quiet, desperate pilgrimage to the only sanctuary left, the campfire of the philosopher king. The Grand Thoreau night. By midnight, the perfectly round pond was surrounded. The scene was breathtaking, evoking a grand Thoreauvian masterpiece. The vast canopy of stars above, the heavy, grounding earth below, and the towering pines all seemed to conspire together to hold the grief of the mourning students. Fireflies flickered through the forest, dancing in tandem with the glowing embers of the campfire that reflected brilliantly off the still surface of the water. It was a vigil. It was a celebration. It was a testament to a soul. Coach Gable, the imposing legend of the mat, was the most profoundly impacted. Sitting on a camp chair with Gideon Rivers right by his side, her hand resting firmly on his shoulder to anchor him, Gable told stories of Elia's Thorne. He recalled the poker games, the late-night debates, and the fierce loyalty of his friend. The aging coach laughed until his chest shook, and then, without shame, he reached up and wiped the heavy tears from his weathered face. And then, stepping quietly out from the shadows of the pines, came Maya Eden. She didn't approach Gideon. She found a quiet spot across the pond, sitting with her knees pulled to her chest. They didn't speak. In a crowd of dozens, amidst the laughter and the quiet sobs, no words were necessary. But across the glowing expanse of the campfire, their eyes constantly found one another. The orange light flickered across Maya's face, illuminating the deep, unspoken regret and the undeniable, irreducible twin flame recognition that still burned between them. Gideon looked at her, the girl who had run, the queen who had sought shelter in the anesthetic, and he didn't feel anger. Guided by the radical grace Thorne had taught him, and the ancient endurance of the McKnights, now resting in his lap, Gideon just felt a profound, patient ache. The campfire burned fiercely through the night. Students came and went, ghosts passing through the trees, sharing coffee whiskey, sharing silence, and sharing the weight of existence. They stayed until the fireflies vanished and the sun finally broke over the tops of the towering pines, a collective dawn rising to honor the inimitable Elia's Thorne, a hail fellow well met and dearly missed. In the early dawn, Gable walked quietly to the pond, now shimmering in the early morning light, and bowed his head, his tears falling from the well of his soul. He bent to one knee and said a sleent prayer. Gideon watching him from across the campground and remembering a verse from the prophet, and ever has it been, that love knows not its own depths until the hour of separation. Gideon walked to where the coach was kneeling and placed his hand on Gable's shoulder. He kneeled down and gently said, "I'm so sorry about your friend, Coach." Gable McIntyre rose to his feet and said, "Let's dedicate your journey on the mats to him." Gideon nodded and said, "You're goddamn right we will." Gable saw the night before him and thought, God help his opponents, because we're bringing the thunder and the lightning and whatever else is needed. End of Episode 1, Season 2 of Grand Amplitude Thoreau.